The gentleman will continue to yield. I do think we ought to make clear what we are talking about. Important public policy questions being debated for 3 minutes on each side. That, as I said, is a travesty.
If the gentleman would yield. Someone would yield.
I don't hear objection on this side of the aisle.
Just for the record, Mr. Speaker, I think the gentleman from Massachusetts may have somewhat of a short memory, given that in December we had a vote on a CR for 1 hour under a closed rule. So with that, just a little reminder.
The gentleman yield. The gentleman yield. I ask the gentleman to yield.
I look forward.
I'll yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I look forward to talking with the
I hope I don't now. I yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Well, I didn't know how long it was going to take my Republican friends to going from talking about their superior virtue to saying they were just like us. It took less time than I thought. But I would also say that in the bills that came out of the committee that I chaired, we always had debate and we always had open rules. But if the gentleman is saying that he now understands why people on our side did what we did, and I often disagreed, as I said, he got there more quickly than I thought he would. And that may be the only thing about the way they're running the House that has happened more quickly than we thought it would.
Reclaiming my time, I will tell my friend, the Majority Leader, I still do not hear objection on our side.
I thank the gentleman.
Louis.
I was just going to ask what he said. I didn't understand. I'm sorry.
Did he object? No. Did he object? No.
Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Committee will be in order.
Except with the chairman, I strike the requisite number of words.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Let me ask, do we know how many amendments are left on your side, Mr. Chairman? How many are there?
50. I think 18 of which are subject to a point of order.
We understand that you have 50 amendments left.
I understand.
18 of which are subject to point of order. One of ours is. We have 3, and we have 1 colloquy. You asked us for a colloquy? We got you a colloquy.
All right.
Okay? Now, I hope some of the, just in the spirit of cooperation, I hope some of you who might think about doing what a lot of our members have done and decide not to offer your amendment so we can get the hell out of here.
Does the gentleman yield back?
I yield back my time.
Before the gentleman yields back, would the gentleman yield briefly?
Thank you.
Without objection, the gentleman has continue his time.
Mr. Chairman, I think all of us understand how important it is that we finish this bill tonight.
Yes.
And therefore, the shorter we can make our speeches, the better off we all are. So we hope to ask each one of you, as you offer your amendment and the rebuttals, to be brief, understanding that the rest of us would like to leave here just as quickly as we can. I yield back. Order.
His time.
Just do 6. Just do 6. 3 and 3.
Gentlemen.
I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry. Your staff was asking me a question.
Okay. Ask. Are you ready?
This will take a second, guys.
Mr. Chairman.
Struck. Committee will be in order.
I move the committee rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee do rise. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. Opinion chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The committee will rise.
This is 6 minutes, right?
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 1, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The chairman of the Committee of the Whole House of the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 1 and has come to no resolution thereon. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that during further consideration of H.R. 1, pursuant to applicable previous orders of the House, each amendment otherwise debatable for 10 minutes instead be debatable for 6 minutes.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
From Colorado going to offer his amendment.
The House will be in order. Will members please take their conversations off the floor? The House will be in order. Will the members please clear the well and take their conversations off the floor? This is 92. Pursuant to House Resolution 92 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 1. Will the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, kindly resume the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 1, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill making appropriations for the Department of Defense and the other departments and agencies of the government for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2011, and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose earlier today, Amendment Number 8, printed in the Congressional Record offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns, had been disposed of, and the bill had been read through page 359, line 22. Committee will be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida or Arizona rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment. Will the gentleman specify the number of the amendment?
This is number 377.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 377, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona.
Pursuant to the Order House of February 18, 2011, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake, and a member opposed will each control 3 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona. The gentleman will suspend. The committee will be in order. The chair asks members to take their conversations off the floor on both sides of the aisle. Gentleman from Arizona.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Chairman, the taxpayers have subsidized ethanol for far too long. This amendment will simply bring that slowly to a stop. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. Does any member wish? What person, gentleman from Iowa, rise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to claim time in opposition to the gentleman's agreement or amendment. Excuse me.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes in opposition.
I thank the chairman. This amendment clearly limits consumer choice. It's yet another attack on our nation's progress to try and achieve energy security. The technology that he's trying to prohibit basically would allow individuals to have a choice as to what percentage blend they'd want, whether E10, E30, E15, E85, whatever suits their best needs, their affordability, and their performance and gas mileage. it would actually make us much more dependent long-term on foreign oil because you're going to limit the choices that are there. And without the blender pumps that he wants to prohibit, most Americans are left with just one option, and that's the E10. If we continue to limit the amount of U.S.-produced ethanol we can use in our vehicles, we will be continuing to be beholden to foreign sources of energy, and we'll be importing more oil every year. I urge my colleagues to vote against this, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Arizona.
I think the gentleman, this is not a choice at all. It's a mandate. That's why we've got to end it. It's been a boondoggle for 30 years. It remains so. Let's vote for this amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Iowa.
I thank the chairman. I'll be very brief, but this is limiting consumer choice. It's going to increase our dependence on foreign oil, and I would ask my colleagues to vote against this ill-founded amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
That's for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote has been requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed. Gentleman from Arizona.
I have an amendment at the desk, number 367.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 367, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona.
Pursuant to the order of the House of February 18, 2011, the gentleman from Arizona and a member opposed will each control 3 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona.
We're having a colloquy myself and I think the gentleman, this amendment would be to save the taxpayers roughly $30.5 million by preventing the funding of radio and TV Marti. I've decided to withdraw this amendment in the interest of time and also to work on it in committee with the gentleman from Florida. So we'll enter into a colloquy for just 1 minute and go from there. I happen to feel that we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on radio and TV Marti over the past 25 years. TV Marti is seen by very few. The gentleman from Florida has a different view. We've agreed to scuttle the debate here and take it up in committee, but I would yield such time as he may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the gentleman from Arizona. We do have a disagreement here, as I think most of us know. I obviously will continue to work on this issue. I welcome anybody who wants to...
Would the gentleman yield? Did the gentleman from Arizona say he was going to withdraw his amendment on Marti?
Yes.
Yes, I will.
I was just curious to hear that. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Reclaiming my time. So again, I will continue to work on this issue. Obviously, the issue of freedom is something that I think is cherished by this House. There's a history of supporting freedom, and I know it will continue to support freedom. But we will have ample opportunity to debate this and discuss this in other opportunities. So with that, I would yield back to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman. With that, I withdraw the amendment. I ask unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment.
Without objection, so ordered, and the amendment is withdrawn.
Don't we have to, did we vote on the original one?
For what purpose the gentleman from New Hampshire rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, number 166.
Mr. Chairman.
The clerk will
Mr.
The clerk will designate the amendment first.
Did we
Amendment
ever
number
vote on the
166.
first Flake amendment on ethanol?
Yes, and it was and the vote was postponed. The clerk will now designate the amendment.
Amendment number 166, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Ginta of New Hampshire.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of my amendment of proposed ban.
Pursuant to the order of the House of February 18, 2011, the gentleman from New Hampshire, Mr. Ginta, and a member opposed will each control 3 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of my amendment of proposed ban on project labor agreements, also known as PLAs. President Obama signed an executive order nearly 2 years ago imposing PLAs on federal construction projects. A PLA mandates that whenever the government pays for a project, union workers must be hired for the job. This stifles competition and inflates the project's cost by steering scarce tax dollars straight into directly union pockets. The previous administration banned PLAs, and according to a study cited by the Cato Institute, the ban saved taxpayers as much as $2.6 billion in 2008 alone. Mr. Chairman, this is a spending reduction bill focused on saving taxpayer dollars to the tune of $2.6 billion annually. My amendment simply states no government money can be used to pay for any project that requires a PLA. This solves a significant problem. This is not against our unions. It is about providing equal footing between union and non-union contractors. Considering the massive debt and deficit we are now struggling under, I feel that we can't afford at this point to waste more taxpayer dollars. My goal here is to get more effective and efficient government. This amendment creates a level playing field that encourages fair and open competition for federal construction contracts funded by this bill. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Connecticut rise?
I rise to claim the time in opposition.
The gentlelady is recognized for 3 minutes.
I rise in opposition to this amendment. It prohibits the use of funds in this act for any government contract. I yield myself 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
And includes a project labor agreement. The amendment is nothing more than another example of a union-busting Republican agenda. Project labor agreements contribute to the economy and efficiency of federal construction projects, help keep them on time and on budget. They bring all the contractors, subcontractors to agree to a standard set of conditions from the beginning of the project, and despite all the rhetoric on the other side that PLAs increase the cost of construction project, there is no evidence to that. 2 years ago, the Economic Policy Institute reviewed a series of studies for and against prevailing wage laws and concluded that there was no adverse impact on government contract costs. Mr. Chairman, this is nothing else but a distraction. PLAs are nothing new. They've been used on some of the most famous construction consequential projects in our history, the Hoover Dam Bypass Bridge and the projects under the Tennessee Valley Authority, just to name a few. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would add that currently in New Hampshire, my home state, we have a Job Corps Center that is slated to be built, $35 million project, which is going to help up to 500 youth annually in the state of New Hampshire. The PLA is exactly what is stopping this project from occurring. We'd like to not only expand the opportunity here in New Hampshire and across the country to get these projects moved forward, do them in a fair and equitable way. And I'd also note that our friends from the Associated Builders and Contractors support this amendment, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, as well as the National Black Chamber of Commerce, and I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentlelady from Connecticut.
I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Miller.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, gentleman, for yielding, and I rise in opposition to this amendment. Contrary to what the author of the amendment has said, there is no requirement in a PLA that you have only union contractors at that. This is a time when you come together pre-project to decide how this project shall be developed, whether there'll be a training project involved in this, whether there'll be local hires, whether there'll be participation by minority and women subcontractors and others on this job. In my area, some of the largest energy projects in the nation are being built by worldwide companies, are being built with project labor agreements. In our cities, project labor agreements are used, and the record continues over and over again, on time, done right the first time, and it's a mix of projects mix of contractors that get accepted. There's nothing in the executive order that requires union contractors. There's nothing in the executive order that requires a PLA. I know, because I tried to get a few, and the administration didn't go there. So let's not overstate the case here. It encourages them. But the fact is, PLAs have worked both on public projects and on private projects very, very well.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would simply reiterate that the study pointing to 2008 shows the ban on PLAs saved taxpayers $2.6 billion. Let's allow all small business owners throughout our country to go after these types of projects. It's fair and it's equitable, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentlelady from Connecticut.
I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 1 minute. Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to this amendment because I believe it's based upon two false premises. The first is that evidence shows that contracts performed under PLAs are not as efficient. The data simply don't exist that show that. And second is the implication that this is somehow a politically connected decision by governments to reward building trades unions. First of all, it doesn't have to be a union contractor. And second, I think most importantly, all kinds of non-governmental users use PLAs. The Disney Corporation, Inland Street, ARCO, Boeing, Harvard University. These are all institutions and companies that use PLAs because they believe they're a good, sound business judgment. Why should the federal government of the United States be precluded from exercising a similar sound business judgment? This is a poorly thought out amendment, and the right vote is no. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from New Hampshire. Is there any time on your side? Gentleman from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would finally reiterate this proposal is a spending reduction bill to the tune of approximately $2.6 billion annually in savings. It allows our small business owners and subcontractors to bid on projects across our nation, get them back to work, and I would ask my colleagues to vote in favor of the Gint amendment. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Hampshire. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The noes?
I'd ask for a roll call vote.
A recorded vote is requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Hampshire will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
I move to strike the requisite number of
Gentleman is
words.
recognized for 5 minutes.
Where's Mr. Welch? Good. Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word for the purpose of a colloquy with the gentleman from Vermont and the chairman of the Defense Subcommittee. I yield to the gentleman from Vermont.
I thank the gentleman from Washington. I stand here today to discuss the Yellow Ribbon Program, which is critical in my home state of Vermont, but it's critical in every state that has returning soldiers from Afghanistan and Iraq. In Vermont, we've recently welcomed home 1,500 National Guard men and women from a year-long deployment in Afghanistan. The Yellow Ribbon Program, as you know, Mr. Ranking Member, helps deploying and redeploying National Guard and Reserve members and their families when they get home. Prior to deployment, they educate members and their families in affected communities on what to expect while their loved ones are gone. After deployment, they focus on reconnecting members and their families with service providers such as TRICARE, the Department of Veterans Affairs, Judge Advocate Generals to ensure a clear understanding of the benefits they're entitled to and they need. In addition, combat stress and transition and how members and their families can address these issues are integral to the post-deployment phase. In Vermont, we have the 4th highest per capita participation rate in the nation in the National Guard. These are very valuable services that get to the heart of supporting our troops and their families. And I hope to work with the subcommittee to ensure that any unmet needs of this program are addressed as expeditiously as possible, and I yield back to the gentleman from Washington.
I thank the gentleman from Vermont, and I yield to the chairman of the Defense Subcommittee, our good friend, Mr. Young.
Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time, I will simply say we support this program. The former chairman, Mr. Dix, supports it. The present chairman, Mr. Young, supports it. The committee added additional funding for the program. Florida National Guard had an extremely large return home from the 53rd Combat Brigade team. We understand the importance of the program. We support what the gentleman is, and will continue to work with the gentleman.
Thank you.
I thank the chairman. I agree that the Yellow Ribbon Program has been a top priority of the subcommittee. We have worked tirelessly to ensure our brave men and women and their families are taken care of when they are serving the nation. I, too, will work with the gentleman from Vermont and the gentleman from Florida to ensure the needs of our troops and their families are met. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Who seeks recognition? For what purposes does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Take your time. I rise to offer an amendment pre-printed in the Congressional Record and designated as Amendment 495. Sir.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 495, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Hall of Texas.
Pursuant to the order of the House of February 18, 2011, the gentleman from Texas and a member opposed will each control 3 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
My amendment would prohibit the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA as we call them, from creating or implementing a national climate service. The release of the President's FY 2012 budget request this week included a significant reorganization of NOAA, the largest since it became an agency in 1970. This is an action that they took, ignoring congressional requests to cease and desist. The new line office will take vital resources from the Oceanic and Atmospheric Research Office, essentially gutting the fundamental research of NOAA and shifting the main focus of the agency to climate. This shift threatens to harm important NOAA activities, such as helping with the restoration of the Gulf of Mexico to pre-spill conditions. The present-day concerns require attention and focus. As it is, this continuing resolution is going to force NOAA to make some official and very difficult decisions with respect to priorities. As a matter of policy, NOAA has not even requested funding for the climate service in FY 2011. However, we're aware of the implementation of the climate service is already underway in the form of significant planning, transitioning, and reorganization of resources. My amendment would ensure that NOAA does not move forward with this reorganization without congressional consideration and approval, specifically from the authorizing as well as the appropriating committees. My amendment does not cut NOAA's budget and is not an attempt to hinder the agency from providing useful and authoritative information, but rather to communicate congressional priorities when it comes to public safety and economic prosperity, and they're not above complying with congressional requests. I urge members to support the amendment. I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. For what purpose the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
I rise to claim the time in opposition.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 3 minutes.
One, this is a budget-neutral reorganization of NOAA. Two, a third of our gross domestic product requires accurate information in terms of climate and weather conditions. This would allow, this is the third and most important point, this reorganization, this climate service would allow the private sector to get data that NOAA is already collecting and use it to better forecast for their activities. I would like to take and yield a minute to the ranking member on the Agriculture Committee, the gentleman from the great state of California.
Thanks for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I rise in strong opposition. If any of you live in coastal communities, you want to oppose this bill. Ocean acidification is a real threat to this nation. Climate change is happening, and the ocean is where climate is born. The coast of California is seriously considering all what these rising ocean will do to the economic value of the most valuable coastal property in the United States. So you don't want to take out the partner working with state and local governments on these issues. If tourism is in your community, if fishing is in your community, and in fact, if educational institutions. Yesterday, hundreds of students from all over the United States, high school students, were here working, showing their science projects on ocean acidification. They won awards from government entities and nonprofit entities. Their future is about studying these issues. This is the kind of program that we want to invest in. Smart technology, smart energy, that is the way we're going to handle this problem in the future.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Those are jobs. No on this amendment.
What gentleman from Texas?
I yield the following time to Dr. Brown, gentleman from Georgia.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a half-baked idea. The Chairman and I have written NOAA over and over again trying to get information. It has not come before our Science Committee. It has not been vetted. It may be a good idea. It may not be. I ask that members of this body vote no so that the Science, Space, and Technology Committee can look at this issue, can talk to NOAA, can find out all about it. It's not going to prevent people from getting climate information or weather information. We should not launch out into something when we don't know what the consequences or even the maybe bad consequences of this might be. So we need to support this amendment. Please vote yes, so that the Science Committee can come and totally vet it, find out what NOAA's doing, as we should. We have the jurisdiction in the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, so it's actually absolutely important for us to do this without NOAA just launching off on its own.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
How much time do I have left?
Gentleman has 1.5 minutes remaining.
Thank you. This is a budget-neutral reorganization that will allow private business to get data that NOAA is already collecting. That's all it is. It's critically important information for those businesses, and a third of our gross domestic product is reliant on good information about climate so that they can have it. It's transparency. It makes sense, and it's budget neutral. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hall. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. And the amendment is a roll call. A recorded vote is requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed. What purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Only that my colleague can submit her comments for the record. Unanimous consent. Thank you.
Those comments will be covered under general leave. What purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 233, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Kucinich of Ohio.
Pursuant to the order of the House of February 18, 2011, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich, and a member opposed will each control 3 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment would prohibit funds authorized in H.R. 1 to be used for the Missile Defense Program of the Department of Defense. The amendment does not cut overall defense spending, but merely place a limitation on spending on the hapless and hopeless missile defense system. According to the Congressional Research Service, the U.S. has spent over $150 billion on ballistic missile defense since 1985, and there's no working, reliable missile defense system to show for all that investment. H.R. 1 dedicates approximately $10 billion more for ballistic missile defense. Some have argued that such systems are necessary for our national security. In fact, no missile defense system under development has ever passed an unrigged test. According to experts at CRS, the performance in wartime for our newest capabilities is unknown. In December of last year, our ground-based interceptors, known as GMDs, failed test again, a test that cost $100 million. According to the Union of Concerned Scientists, the United States, quote, is no closer today to being able to effectively defend against long-range ballistic missiles than it was 25 years ago, unquote. Missile defense systems are unproven and unworkable. They're worthless as national security, but even though we have never in 25 years created a missile defense system that worked, our misguided commitment to spending billions on this failed program is having a counterproductive effort with other countries. Both the Bush administrations and Obama administrations have mistakenly argued and insisted that the ballistic missile defense system are solely for deterrence and protection against potential future threats. This argument contradicts logic. Missile defense concepts are perceived by both our foes and allies as offensive threats. If we increase our arsenal, we encourage other countries to increase theirs. I want to conclude by saying that when will Congress act appropriately in response to the record of failure in missile defense? Shouldn't we apply the same standard of missile defense as we apply to our schools and No Child Left Behind? If you can't pass the test, then you lose your funding. Reserve the balance.
Gentleman reserves his time. For what purposes does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to claim time in opposition to the...
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, the Kucinich amendment totally ignores the reality of the real threat against our troops, our allies, our deployed forces. It basically destroys our missile system And as you know, the enemies and the potential enemies just continue to develop their offensive missiles. We just cannot do this. This is one of those amendments you just can't do. I'd like to yield at this time 1 minute to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. This amendment is so 1980s. It's when Ronald Reagan proposed Star Wars and the Democrats were opposed, and we're well past that. Missile defense now has total bipartisan support. President Clinton pursued it, President Obama pursued it, both of the President Bushes pursued it. We know two things. The threat is real and the system works. The gentleman from Ohio says this hasn't passed 100 tests. Well, we haven't funded 100 tests. It is absolutely a system that works and that is needed. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida reserves his time. The gentleman from Ohio.
Could I ask the gentleman how much time we each have?
The gentleman has 1 minute remaining.
I would just like to say in response to my friends that my amendment will correct a bipartisan error, and second, that you can't destroy a missile system that doesn't work. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Florida.
Has the gentleman's time expired?
The gentleman has reserved his time.
I will continue to reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Ohio.
I'll just conclude by saying that Philip Coyle, a former Assistant Secretary of Defense, has said the National Missile Defense System has become a theology in the United States, not a technology. We may have faith that it works, but we're taught we have to justify our faith by good works. They don't have any good works connected to this. Thank you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, we're talking about the Patriot missile system. We're talking about the Aegis missile system. We're talking the Arrow system that we cooperate with Israel for their protection. We're talking about basic defense of our troops in the field who are at harm's risk anyway. Just can't do this. And Mr. Kucinich is my friend. He's not always right. He's not always wrong, but he's wrong tonight. And this is just not something that we can tolerate. Our military would never stand for this. We're not going to approve this amendment, Mr. Chairman. So I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. No. Pin in the chair, the noes have it. The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. What purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment. Does the gentleman rise as the designee of Mr. Stark?
Mr. Chairman, I rise as the designee of the gentleman from California, Mr. Stark, to offer amendment. I believe it's 141.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 141, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Ms. Lee of California.
Pursuant to the order of the House of February 18, 2011, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lee, and a member opposed will each control 3 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer this amendment today along with Mr. Stark, Ms. Woolsey, Ms. Sanchez, Mr. Nadler, and Mr. Polis. Our amendment would reduce appropriations for the Department of Defense in this bill to fiscal year 2008 levels. If you want to cut domestic spending to 2008 levels, you can't exempt defense. I want to thank Representative Stark for this amendment and for his leadership in promoting an heir to the end of unlimited spending and no accountability at the Pentagon. Unfortunately, this week my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are proposing an economic blueprint that would slash federal investment in our nation's infrastructure, education system, health care, and programs to meet basic human needs and to create jobs. These cuts, trumpeted as a means of long-term deficit reduction, come at a time of severe economic distress for American families. Earlier this year, the House passed a resolution to reduce non-security domestic spending to 2008 levels. This amendment gives us a chance to put our money where our mouths are. It simply says that defense spending should be reduced to 2008 levels. If we are serious about getting our fiscal house in order, then we need to apply the same rules, mind you, to defense as non-defense discretionary spending. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves her time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, the defense budget this year has already done, we've done something unusual. We have reduced the defense budget by $14.8 billion already in this bill. To reduce the defense funding to the 2008 levels would cut over $50 billion from the DOD, which is really severely impacting both our troops on the ground and jeopardizing national security. Now, if you want to reduce or cancel training for our troops that are coming home from the war, then you'd vote for this amendment. If you want to cancel Navy training exercises, then you'd vote for it. If you want to reduce Air Force flight training hours, you'd vote for this. Delaying or canceling maintenance of aircraft, ships, and vehicles, then you'd vote for this. Delaying important safety and quality of life repairs to facilities and barracks, then you'd vote for this. But I don't support any of that, and I don't think most of our colleagues support any of that, and at a time of war is not the time to be withdrawing from our national defense capability, the readiness and security of our nation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida reserves his time. The gentlelady from California.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, excuse me, I want to yield 1 minute now to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Woolsey.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I have to express my absolute bafflement at the debate we've been having all week in this chamber. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle wax on and on about how we have to restore fiscal discipline and cut all kinds of very necessary programs to the bone. Yet, they won't even bring to our debate one of the most costly expenses we have in this country, and that's Afghanistan. This war in Afghanistan has cost us nearly 1,500 American lives, and the taxpayers a staggering $379 billion and counting. Yet, during this debate, the majority, which is enthusiastic in its support for more and more Afghanistan war spending, wants to eliminate a homeless veterans initiative. That's their approach. Send our brave men and women halfway around the world to be chewed up and traumatized, then pull the plug on the support they need when they get home. That's what they call supporting the troops.
Time of the gentlelady has expired.
We need to cut that expense.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, can I inquire as to how much time I have remaining?
The gentleman has 1 minute and 45 seconds.
Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time to the former chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Dix.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized for 1 minute and 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to rise in strong opposition to this amendment. First of all, working together on a bipartisan basis for the first time, we cut nearly $15 billion from the Obama budget request in 2011 for defense, and we did it on a very careful basis. This amendment would add another $56 billion to that cut. It would do damage to all of our acquisition programs. It would threaten the people in Iraq and Afghanistan and our efforts to conduct the global war on terrorism. So again, I hope that on a very strong bipartisan basis we can reject this amendment, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentlelady from California.
Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have remaining?
Gentlelady has 30 seconds remaining.
Well, let me just say in closing that the Bipartisan Sustainable Defense Task Force report released last year identified at least $1 trillion in cuts over the next 10 years without sacrificing our strategic capabilities. According to the GAO, major weapons programs have suffered from $300 billion in cost overruns. And in fact, it's time to end this war in Afghanistan. These wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, are costing the taxpayers $1 trillion. We know there's no, Al-Qaeda is not in Afghanistan, and we need to put our money where our mouth is, cut the defense budget the same way we're talking about cutting non-defense.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
I'd like to ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise? For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to address Amendment 109 previously filed and printed in the Congressional Record.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 109, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Griffith of Virginia.
Pursuant to the order of the House of February 18, 2011, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, and a member opposed will each control 3 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amendment 109 is a timeout on the EPA. The EPA, in its guidelines for the water quality coming out of mines issued on April 1, 2010, came up with a conductivity test, a test which did not go through the Administrative Procedures Act, a test which is relying on science, which is not yet fully accounted for or reliable. In fact, in the document, in 31 pages, they use words like expect and anticipate what the science will be on 27 of those 31 pages. Mr. Chairman, President Johnson had a war on poverty. There are some in my district and in Appalachia who believe that President Obama and his EPA have a war for poverty in the Appalachian region. That conductivity test is so severe that the distilled water would pass, the Deer Park would pass, the Fiji's just barely going to make it outside of the zone of question, but Evian water that you purchase to drink would not pass. Perrier water that you purchase to drink would not pass. It's not good enough. And Pellegrino is not good enough either. There is a bumper sticker that is very popular now in my district that says, if you think coal is ugly, wait until you see poverty. There are some who believe, and I think that there are some in Washington who think, that Southwest Virginia and other parts of Appalachia should just be a giant park for rich folks to visit. And that those of us who live there, the folks in Washington think, ought to be happy. The folks who live there ought to be happy to have the jobs changing the sheets for the rich folks. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not good enough, and this amendment should pass, and we should put a stop to this regulation. I yield.
I want to congratulate the gentleman. This amendment is well deserved, and it's exactly the right thing to do. I appreciate the gentleman taking up the fight to save the jobs in Appalachia, in Virginia, in Kentucky, West Virginia, Ohio, and the other states where coal is mined. This administration declared war on coal when they took office, and they're trying to carry it out. I appreciate the gentleman carrying the fight.
Thank you. And I reserve the remainder of my time, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman reserves his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
No. I rise to claim the time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this is the second of 3 amendments designed to kill regulation of mountaintop mining. The amendment would prevent EPA from working with other federal agencies and mining companies to ensure that mountaintop mining is carried out in a manner that protects public health, the environment, and the economy using the best available science. Mountaintop surface mining removes entire mountaintops to access the coal underneath, but then deposits toxic mining waste in nearby streams. Practice, when not carried out carefully and responsibly, can be devastating to the environment and to local economies. There's been long-time uncertainty regarding what laws applied, uncertainty about which federal agencies to work with, and uncertainty about potential liability. This uncertainty was eliminated when Interior, EPA, and the Corps of Engineers agreed to work with mining companies and implement a common procedure for reviewing permits. And it was with the goal of, and I quote, to strengthen the Appalachian regional economy and to lay out common procedures on mountaintop mining. This memorandum of understanding brought clarity for all the parties, states, mining companies, environmentalists, and federal agencies so that mining could move forward. But what we have here is an effort at good government punished by legislators with an axe to grind. Agencies are punished for not working together. Then when they do, we punish them for working together. Permit reviews will just take longer, and the process will be more confusing for companies. Because this amendment won't change the law. This amendment could extend the mining company's permit process for years and cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars in delays. That's why this amendment should be defeated, and I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith.
Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have left?
The gentleman has 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment will not bring jobs. It'll take our $60,000 a year plus jobs and give us either unemployment or part-time jobs at minimum wage. And what's interesting is the data that we do have shows that there's a greater biodiversity after mountaintop mining than there was before. I reserve the remainder of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Moran.
How much time do I have remaining, Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman has 30 seconds remaining.
All right. Well, the point is, we have three agencies. They weren't necessarily working together. Now they're working together. We have a memorandum of understanding. They know that their goal is to strengthen the Appalachian regional economy, to work with all the parties, to bring them together. We have that memorandum of understanding. This amendment eliminates all the progress that has been achieved. They were attempting to promote good government and a good relationship with the mining companies. It's not going to happen if this amendment goes through. This amendment kills that understanding. The law remains, but they can't cooperate now if this amendment was to pass.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, has 15 seconds.
Mr. Chairman, again, this, if not passed, will bring us unemployment, not a good economy. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. All time has been yielded. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Chairman, I'll ask for a recorded vote on that.
Recorded vote is requested. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia will be postponed. What purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 548, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Jones of North Carolina.
Pursuant to the order of the House of February 18, 2011, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, and a member opposed will each control 3 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. This amendment would prohibit the federal government from spending millions of taxpayers' dollars expanding job-destroying cat share programs in fisheries along the Atlantic seaboard and the Gulf of Mexico. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased at this time I have two co-sponsors of this legislation. I'd like to yield 1 minute to Mr. Pallone from New Jersey.
Jersey is a minute.
Mr. Chairman, the fishing industry is a crucial part of our nation's economy, and catch shares pose a serious threat to the vitality of the fishing industry. Catch shares is a system where fishermen have to buy the right to fish, and only those who buy this right are given the opportunity to catch a portion of fish. I don't believe any fisherman should have to buy the right to go fishing. What is perhaps most concerning is NOAA's use of important cooperative research and monitoring funds in a carrot-and-stick operation that pressures regional fisheries management councils to adopt catch share programs. Mr. Jones's amendment would simply prevent NOAA from spending funds to push another restrictive management system before they get the current system right. Despite our calls on NOAA to make scientific data and keep fisheries open, there I urge my colleagues to support this amendment by Mr. Jones.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I would like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Massachusetts, also a co-sponsor of this amendment.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, in the Magnuson Act renewal of 2006, we set up a procedure whereby there can be a referendum in each fishery to do the equivalent of cat shares. No one's getting around that. There are some places, I'm told, where people like that. The procedure under the Magnuson Act whereby they can, by referendum, impose that remains available, but it would require the approval of the men and women in the fishery. In much of the East Coast, people don't like that, and what NOAA is doing is going around that referendum requirement by a new thing which they call cat shares. They could do the equivalent in another way. I am particularly puzzled to have in an Obama administration people tell us, well, it's okay. What it does, of course, is to lead to consolidation. They say there's the same amount of income, but it goes to a small number of larger entities, and the smaller individuals are frozen out. And in the area that I represent, the fishing industry doesn't want it. So what I hope we would do is, and what the gentleman's amendment does not affect that part of the Magnuson Act that would allow referenda, so in the fishery where the fishermen like it, they can get a system of quotas, and they can get a system of transferable quotas, and that's what's in the Magnuson Act, transferable quotas with a referendum. Because they couldn't, NOAA was insistent on imposing that over the objective fishermen, they came up with a new system called cat shares. That's what we're banning. We leave the referendum process in place.
Time of the gentleman has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe anyone has risen to claim the time in opposition. I would do that.
That is correct. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 3 minutes.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I didn't hear.
3 minutes.
For 3 minutes. Mr. Chairman, these programs put together by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration are designed to replenish fish stocks. They assign shares to individuals, cooperatives, other fishing communities, because what we have seen that has resulted in depleted fish stocks and overfishing is a race to fish, where the concern is that the stock is being depleted, and so they run out to get what's left. NOAA is trying to intervene and suggest that we should divide up what's left, what we scientifically understand is left, and try to cooperate. Now, I can understand there are many fishing communities that don't want NOAA's intervention, but they have been successful in ensuring sustainable fisheries and preventing overfishing and creating more stable and lucrative fishing jobs in communities from Alaska to Florida. They bring a lot of economic and biological benefits. They eliminate what many think are dangerous race to fish, or what I call derby conditions, and they improve safety for fishermen. NOAA seems to know what they're doing, where they've done it. It's been successful. I think we should look to the experts and understand that we've got to have greater sustainability in fishing. Let me reserve my time. And how much time do I have at this point, Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman from Virginia has 1.5 minutes.
Let me yield a minute to the gentleman from California.
California is recognized for 1 minute. Mr. Chairman, thank you for yielding. I represent a lot of fishermen on the west coast in California and up the west coast all the way up to Alaska. The catch share program has worked very well. The reason you have it is, one, you only have two systems in fishing. You have a season and you have a limit or quota. The pounding of all the boats going at the same time, regardless of weather, is a very risky thing. Now we've divided that up to share. We give shares to boats. So what happens if you're a small fisherman, in a small boat, you got a share. You got your right. You can go out when you want to, not just when the weather is really foul and you may be dangerous. People like this. It's a sustainable. They can get loans on their boat. They know they've got all kinds of certainty that they never had before. To wipe this out, it may be uncomfortable in some other communities, but it'd be much rather directed. If you want to get mad, do it to those communities, because just wiping it out this way, you're going to really hurt where it works. And where it works really well. So please, time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, in closing, I must say this is an East Coast issue. That's why you have Mr. Pallone and Mr. Frank and myself speaking. And with that, the fishermen on the East Coast need fairness from their government, and this amendment will help give fairness to the commercial and recreational fishermen on the East Coast of America. And with that, I will yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Virginia.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I can understand where my very good friends are coming from, and they represent a lot of professional and very responsible fishermen. And I know they know what they're talking about. On the other hand, NOAA does too, and NOAA has been successful. They've been successful from Alaska to Florida in allocating assigned limits to various fishing entities because we are losing our fishing stock.
Gentleman yield.
And I